Mr. Beard here, and I'm going to walk you through some of our short story terms, some common terms you see on short story tests or quizzes, and that are going to be important to you as you read short stories. Alright, so what is a short story? Well, a short story is a brief work of fiction where usually the main character faces a conflict that is worked out in the plot of a story. Some teachers will tell you it's something you can read in one sitting, but the main idea is it's brief and usually the whole problem is worked out very quickly. Alright, character is a person or sometimes animal or other anthropomorphic creatures, like in Beauty and the Beast. You know, you've got characters who are furniture. In Lion King, you've got characters who are animals. I mean, so it's just a person, animal, or other anthropomorphic creature in a story, poem, or play. You've got different types of characters. You've got round, which means they're fully developed. They have many different character traits. You've got flat, meaning they're stereotyped, one-dimensional. You know, think classic bullies or dumb jocks, any of the stereotyped kinds of characters in movies. Static means they don't change throughout the story. Dynamic means they change as a result of story's events. Most protagonists are dynamic. Most protagonists will change in some way throughout the story, but not always. Characterization, how the author develops the characters, especially the main character, can be done through writing what the character does or says, what others say of and to the character, or the author's word choice when they describe the character. There's a couple different types of characterization. One is direct. The author directly states what the character's personality is like. For example, if the author tells you Tom O'Brien was a cruel, cruel man, that would be direct characterization. He's directly telling you. Or maybe Susie was a very nice girl when she would often stop and help her grandmother because she was very nice. Okay, well that's direct characterization. Indirect is where they show a character's personality through his or her actions, their thoughts, feelings, or appearance. Typically, showing indirect is better and is typically better writing, although a lot of times authors will use both of these in some combination to reveal the character, which is what characterization is all about. So an example of indirect characterization would be a girl, let's say her name's Tina, stopping in the hall, and Tina is helping a student who's been pushed into the lockers, and stuff's falling out of his book bag, and there's papers all over the floor, and Tina stops and helps him and pats him on the back and says, "It's okay. Do you need help finding your next class?" The author didn't need to tell you that Tina's a nice girl. He or she showed you that Tina is a nice, thoughtful person. So typically showing is more powerful than telling. Protagonist is the main character of a story, and they usually change. The most important character, and the one that we relate to as an audience the most. Audiences typically make a really strong connection with protagonists, even if they make bad decisions. You know, a perfect example right now in pop culture is the show Breaking Bad. It's blowing up on Twitter. Everyone loves this show. And the protagonist is really not a very good guy. But people relate to this guy because they've spent so much time with him, and we're shown so much narrative. We're given so much narrative time with this character that we follow him down his bad decisions. We relate to him because we really, as an audience, want to identify with the main character, even if they're not necessarily a good, quote-unquote, good guy. Antagonist is the major character who opposes the protagonist. Typically, the antagonist does not change, although that's not always the case. The antagonist does not have to be a bad guy or bad girl. They can be just the character who's opposing the protagonist. There's different types of antagonists: people, nature, society. There's a couple examples. Conflict is a struggle between two opposing forces. There's internal, which takes place in a character's own mind, which would be man versus him or herself. External, a character struggles against an outside force. And here are the different types of that. Okay, here's the plot diagram. And a plot is a series of related events that make up a story. So I forgot my plot diagram. It doesn't fill out here, okay? Exposition is the beginning of a story. Rising action is when the complications begin to occur. Things start to go bad for the protagonist. Climax is the turning point in the story where the protagonist addresses the main conflict. Following action is when things start to get wrapped up, and resolution is when things are resolved, and sometimes there's a denouement, which means a revealing or a twist ending. So you can see this is when we, in exposition, is when we meet the characters. We see the setting and start to see some conflicts. The setting is the time and place of the story's action. Rising action, like we said, is when there's a series of complications. They usually happen when the main character takes action to resolve their problems and are met with further problems. Climax is the turning point in the story, the high point of interest and suspense. Teachers often say it's the most exciting part of the story. Well, no, not necessarily. But it is the point of the story where the protagonist addresses the main conflict, and there's some sort of change brought about by this. Either the protagonist succeeds and things start to go well for him or her, or the protagonist fails and they have to change course. Following action is all the events after the climax when things start to get wrapped up. And resolution is the end of the central conflict. It shows how the situation turns out and ties up any loose ends. And a denouement, like we said, is a revealing. Think Scooby-Doo. At the end of every Scooby-Doo, they rip the mask off the monster, and it's revealed to be Principal so-and-so. Well, that's a revealing or twist ending. Point of view is the vantage point from which the writer tells the story. First person is one of the characters is telling the story using personal pronouns like I or we. Third person limited centers on one character's thoughts and actions. One character. We only go inside the brain of one of our characters, usually the protagonist. Third person omniscient. We have an all-knowing narrator. They can hop in and out of people's thoughts. Theme is the central message or insight into life revealed through literary work, the main idea of a story. Flashback is the present scene in the story is interrupted to flash backward and tell us what happened in an earlier time. Foreshadowing is the opposite. The writer gives us clues at what is going to happen later. They give us little hints that things may happen. Symbol is an object, person, or event that functions as itself but could also stand for something else, like a flag, or in this case, scales that represent the justice system. Figurative language involves using imaginative comparisons between two unlike things. A simile does this by comparing two unlike things using like or as. I wandered lonely as a cloud is a simile. A metaphor is comparing two unlike things not using like or as, but usually saying something is something else. For example, life is a roller coaster. It has lots of ups and downs. That's a metaphor. Personification is giving human qualities to non-human things. The wind howled. The sun smiled down upon us. These are non-human things. They can't do that, but when we describe them that way, it allows us to imagine them a little better. Irony is a contrast between expectation and reality. Verbal irony is saying one thing but meaning something completely different. Situational irony is a contradiction between what you expect to happen and what really happens. For example, the fire truck catching on fire would be the last thing you'd expect to happen. That's a situational irony. Dramatic irony, when we know something as a reader, as an audience, that characters do not know. For example, if there's a killer right behind a girl in her bedroom, and we can see it on screen, but she's just, listening to blurred lines on her iPod and dancing around her bedroom and has no idea the killer's there. That provides some sort of suspense for us as an audience. Cause what's going to happen with, when she just has no idea. That's dramatic irony. Allusion is reference to a statement, person, or place, or events from literature, history, religion, mythology, politics, sports, basically referring to another work or idea that everyone would be familiar with. That's why the Bible is probably the number one most alluded to source in American society, because so many people, even non-religious people or non-Christian people, are familiar with stories from the Bible. Calling a sports matchup David versus Goliath matchup. That's a perfect example. So that's an allusion when you refer to a well-known work or idea. Suspense, when you have uncertainty or anxiety about what's going to happen next. And language that appeals to the senses, again, is imagery. And that is all she wrote for our Lit Terms guided notes. I will post the handouts on both YouTube and on Twitter, so you can grab the accompanying handout to fill out if you are absent or not in this class. That's it.